In this video, I'm going to show you how to clean, maintain, and add fluid to your HydroLux cooling system. The first thing we want to do is check our fluid levels. We're going to need to locate the reservoir, and this will be in a different place in every single computer. Some systems may even have the reservoir on the front of the computer. If you have a GPU or CPU cooler that looks like the ones here, or the Corsair in this system, these are closed-loop, non-serviceable units and do not require any fluid maintenance. So now that we found our reservoir, we want to check the fluid levels. The reservoir should be full or almost full. Ideally, we want to see about 90% of the reservoir or more filled with fluid. Now, as time goes on, the fluid level might drop a little bit, and we can resolve that by topping it off and adding more fluid. If when looking at your reservoir, you see a noticeable drop in fluid, more than 20 or 30% of the fluid is gone, this is evidence that there is some sort of a leak we need to trace down and resolve. If this is the case and you've noticed a large amount of fluid is missing from your reservoir, please refer to my YouTube guide on tracing down and fixing leaks inside of a computer. If your reservoir is low and needs more fluid, the first thing we need to do is figure out exactly what type of fluid to add to the system. Digital Storm uses several different types of fluid, and we never want to mix one fluid type with another fluid type, as it can cause corrosion. Also, you never want to add bottled or tap waters to the system. These waters have impurities in them, chlorines, and minerals that can react negatively with the metals inside of your cooling loop and cause quite extensive corrosion and damage to the inside of the system. Since there are many different types of fluids used in our computers, the best thing to do is to contact Digital Storm and ask our technicians exactly what type of fluid to safely use inside of your computer. Some liquid cooling bottles will come with these nifty flexible fill caps that you can screw on, and they give you great access to reservoirs in pretty much any location inside of a computer. Unfortunately, a lot of bottles don't come with these, so we need to find other solutions to get fluid from our bottle into our reservoir. In some of our computer builds, the reservoir might be too close to the top of the chassis to access with a normal funnel. One great option is a flexible funnel. These can be found at most hardware and automotive stores, and will also do a good job of allowing us to fill fluid into our system. Another option is any sort of plastic squeeze bottle, like this one here. I picked this up at a local grocery store for about $2. Once we have our bottle, we can go to almost any hardware store. Most hardware stores have a selection of clear rubber tubing in a variety of different diameters. All we need to do is grab our squeeze bottle and match it up with a tube. Once we have those two pieces together, we have our solution for adding fluid to our computer. Whichever tool you use for filling your computer, we want to make sure that we clean it before we use it. The best practice is to clean it thoroughly with soap and water, and then dry it with a clean towel until there's absolutely no moisture left. We just want to make sure there are no impurities left behind that could cause contamination when we fill our system. In this next segment, I'll go over the most common types of reservoirs found in our computers and how to open them so we can add fluid. The first type of reservoir is our medium and long style of tube reservoir. These are primarily found inside of our Velox and Aventum 3 systems. To open this reservoir, simply grab the top and turn counterclockwise until the top comes off. With the cap off, we can now start filling our reservoir. We only want to fill the reservoir at most to the top of these screw threads. If we fill it any higher, the reservoir might overflow when we screw the top back on. Now we want to grab our cap and screw it back on the reservoir. We do want to make sure the cap is fairly tight onto the computer. We don't want to over-tighten it, but we want to make sure that it's tight enough for the rubber O-ring inside of the cap to make solid contact with the reservoir so it makes a good seal. This way, if you ever need to lay the computer flat, transport it, or ship it, you don't have to worry about any fluids leaking from your reservoir. Our next style of reservoir will be our dual or single bay XSPC front mount reservoirs. These reservoirs have their fill ports on the top, which may require us to remove either an optical drive or a blank slot in the front of our computer case to give us the access we need to add fluid. In this case, there's a CD-ROM drive directly above our reservoir, so we'll need to remove that to get access. The first thing we want to do is go to the back of the optical drive and remove our SATA and our power cable. On the left side of the drive, there should be two screws holding it to the case. We'll want to remove both of those, and there should be either 2 or 4 screws on the other side of the drive that we'll want to remove as well. In some cases, there might be an additional retention clip that we have to lift up on to free the optical drive. Once we lift up on this, we can free the optical drive and slide it out of the front of the computer. So now that we have access to our fill ports, we're going to need some sort of a flat object. I find that a penny or a quarter works pretty well. We're going to use this in the little slots on top of the fill ports and spin them counterclockwise to open them. Now these might require a decent amount of force to open. Sometimes they're stuck on there pretty good. So don't worry or don't be alarmed if you need to put a little bit of force in it to get them free. But once you get it spinning, you should be able to loosen the rest with your hands. Once the fill port is out, we have access and we can add our fluid. As with our first reservoir, when we're putting our cap back on, we want to make sure we screw it in nice and tight to make sure it gets a good seal to prevent any liquid from spilling out. Our next style of reservoir is our cube and rectangle style. Unfortunately, I don't have one of these reservoirs currently installed in a computer, so I'll have to show you the reservoir itself. These will have a fill port on the top of the reservoir that we can open with a penny, a screwdriver, or any sort of flat object. As with our XSPC bay before, we turn counterclockwise and remove this fill port. That gives us access to add our fluid. Once we're done, we screw this back on and make sure it's nice and tight. The next and final reservoir is the one found in our Bolt 3 systems. We also have these in a number of other systems, but I'm going to touch on the Bolt 3 first because there's a few additional steps we need to do to get access to the reservoir. The first thing we need to do is remove the side panel glass to get access into the computer. Now we need to go over to the back side of the system and remove these 3 screws. With those screws removed, we can now take off the entire front panel of the chassis. The panel does fit quite snugly into the chassis, so you might have to wiggle it back and forth a little bit to get it to come loose. With our front panel off, there is one more piece we need to remove so we can access our reservoir. This panel is held on with 2 screws. One is this thumb screw inside of the system, and the second is a regular screw on the outside. Once we have both screws removed, the only thing holding this piece onto our system is the LED light strip. This is held on with a double-sided sticky tape, and all we need to do is get our finger underneath one of the edges of the strip and gently pull along its edge until the LED strip separates from the panel. Once the LED strip is off, we can remove our panel and gain access to our reservoir. We now have access to our reservoir, but we can't open it just yet. In the Bolt 3, the reservoir sits sideways, so we'll need to tilt the system up on its end so the fill port faces upwards before we can open it to add fluid. Before we move the system, we want to place a mouse pad or a t-shirt on the table just to protect the back of the panel from any scratches. Once we have that in place, we can grab the computer and put it on its back panel. We want to grab a flathead screwdriver and turn counterclockwise until the cap comes off. When filling this reservoir, we want to fill it just below where the screw threads are for the cap. If we fill it any higher, the reservoir will overflow when we screw the cap back on. When we put the cap back on, we want to screw it on nice and tight. This reservoir will be sitting sideways once we put the system back to its normal orientation, so it's very important that this reservoir cap is tightened securely and gets a good snug fit to make sure no fluid leaks out. Now that our reservoir is full, we want to stand our system back up and start putting it back together. The first thing we want to grab is this top panel here. There's a notch in the bottom corner of the panel, and it fits into the system like so. To attach this panel, we want to start with the outside screw. We'll want to hold the panel in place with one hand while screwing it in with the other. At this point, I decided to reattach the LED light strip. It should have enough stickiness left in it, so just grab it and stick it back onto the panel. Now we need to put our thumb screw back in. There are technically 2 holes that this thumb screw can go in. It really doesn't matter which one we put it in, but getting it to thread can be a little bit difficult. The best practice I've found to get it to thread easily is to place one of your hands on the top of the system and brace the panel with your fingers. This way you can apply pressure and move the panel around as needed until the panel's holes line up with the screw threads in the case. Once aligned, we can go ahead and thread in our screw. Now we need to reinstall the front panel. I found the best way to reinstall this is to insert the left edge first. This allows the panel to not catch on anything, and it seems to make it go into place much easier, at least on the system that I have in front of me. You're going to have to go along the different edges and kind of push them and work them. You might have to flex the chassis a little bit to get this panel to stick in. But once you poke at it a little bit, the panel should fall into place without too much effort. Once our panel is in place, we can grab the 3 screws that we removed earlier and put them back in. Other than putting our side panel glass back on, our system is back together. The next step we want to take in maintaining our liquid cooling system is dusting and cleaning out the radiators. As more and more dust settles into a radiator, it decreases the amount of airflow that can pass through the fins. Over time, this can build up and cause a significant reduction in cooling efficiency. There are several different tools we can use to dust out your radiator. One of the cheapest and most effective ways is to grab a can of compressed air. These are inexpensive and can be found in most stores. If you're going to use compressed air, make sure you pre-spray the can before you spray it inside of the computer, and always make sure to keep the can level. If you tilt the can or don't pre-spray it, There's the possibility that some of the frigid propellant inside of the can may be ejected into your computer, and if that gets on any of your circuitry, it can cause damage. Another great option is any sort of household air compressor. I've used these to clean out a number of my computers in the past, and they've worked very well for me. One thing to be aware of when using any sort of a compressor is the high rate of PSI that they can generate. Because of this, a good general rule of thumb is to keep the air compressor nozzle between 12 and 18 inches or more away from your computer. We really don't want to blast any high pressure air over our motherboard, video cards, or other electronic circuitry inside of the computer. If you have a pressure regulator valve, you can probably dial down the pressure to a safe level, but if you're not sure what that level is, it's always best to err on the side of caution, especially since many of these components can cost thousands of dollars. If you're looking for a great tool to invest in that will help you clean your computer over and over again, I highly recommend one of these electric blower fans that are made specifically for cleaning inside of a computer. These blowers deliver a consistent blast of high pressure air, and they do so without creating any static fields that could damage your components. They also feature dust filters on the bottom. This prevents any dust or any unwanted particulates from being blasted back into your computer. There are a number of brands that make these, and they usually range between about $40 and $65. Check the links in the YouTube description for an example of some of the models that we recommend. I've had a few people tell me before that they've used a vacuum cleaner to clean out the inside of their computer. I would advise strongly against this. Vacuum cleaners can often cause a static field around their nozzle, and this field can cause extensive damage to your sensitive electronic components. This is an option we definitely want to avoid. Each computer is going to be a little bit different with how many radiators it has and where they're located. Some systems might only have one, where others might have 2 or 3. While there's no way I can easily go over all the different locations where a radiator might be in this video, the best thing I've found is to trace the liquid cooling tubes coming out of either your CPU, reservoir, or video cards, and follow them along with your finger until they terminate into a radiator. If there's enough dust inside of your computer to be easily noticeable, you probably want to take the system outside when you're dusting it. This way we don't blast the inside of your house with a bunch of dust. When it comes to dusting radiators, it's pretty straightforward. I like to start dusting from the inside out first. That way a majority of the dust is blasted out the front of the computer instead of back into your system where we'll have to clean it later. If there's a fan on your radiator, be sure not to overspin it while dusting. Overspinning your fan can cause premature damage and wear to the fan bearing. While dusting, it's best to hold the fan blades with your finger to prevent them from moving. I recommend going up and down both sides of your radiator several different times to make sure we get all the dust out of it. Once we're done dusting the radiators, there's going to be a thin layer of dust coating the inside of our computer, so we'll want to give it a once-over with our duster just to make sure we get everything out and the system looks nice and clean. As for how often you'll need to clean your computer, a lot of it depends on the inflow and outflow of your fans, the type of chassis you have, and where the computer is located. Having indoor pets or a computer located on the floor or carpet will definitely increase the frequency of how often we'll want to clean the computer. Some systems require dusting every week, other systems can go a few months without needing dusting. At the very least, I recommend dusting your computer out once every few months. Even if you don't see dust on surfaces inside of your computer, it doesn't mean that it isn't starting to impact inside of your radiators. With many of these systems being overclocked and pushed beyond their normal parameters, it really is important that we maintain the best efficiency possible from our liquid cooling setup. This will help your computer to run efficiently and reliably throughout and beyond its life cycle.